Act 1, The Desert and the Girl. The desert wind howled like a lost soul as dust rolled across the forgotten town of Hollow Creek. Once alive with promise, the town now wore the look of a place where dreams had withered and men's greed had taken root. On the porch of the saloon, a girl barely 17 sat chained to a post like an animal. Her hair was tangled, her eyes empty, her spirit locked in silence. Her name was Alara. The townsfolk passed by without a second glance. To them, she wasn't a girl. She was property, taken in a crooked card game by men who valued whiskey more than life. Her owner, a brute named Seth Harlow, spat tobacco and called her his prize. He'd slap her when she spoke, kick her when she didn't. The law. Bought. The sheriff drank at Harlow's table. Nobody dared stand up, not in Hollow Creek. But sometimes, fate sends storms where silence lives. That storm came in the form of a lone rider. His horse's hooves struck the dirt road slow and heavy. Dust clung to his boots, and the brim of his hat hid eyes that had seen too much. They called him Caleb Ward, a cowboy with no master, no family, and no fear. He saw her. One look at Alara's chained wrists, at the way her small frame shook under the sun, and something inside Caleb shifted, something old, raw, and righteous. Act 2, The First Stand. Caleb tethered his horse, stepped up to the porch, and spoke with a calm voice that carried like thunder. "You got a reason to keep her chained like that?" Seth Harlow laughed. "Reason? Don't need one. She's mine. Won her fair." Caleb's jaw tightened. "She's no prize. She's a person." The saloon went silent. Cards stopped mid-deal, whiskey glasses froze in midair. Nobody spoke against Seth Harlow. Nobody. Harlow leaned back, sneering. "You new around here, cowboy. Don't go spitting holy words where they don't belong. This town runs on rules, my rules. Girls' property. That's the law." Caleb's eyes burned beneath his hat. "Not while I'm breathing." For the first time in years, someone had spoken against the chains. Act 3, The Battle of Wills. Caleb unlatched the shackle from the post. His hands were steady, deliberate. Seth stood up fast, hand on his revolver. "You best rethink that, boy," Seth growled. "I already thought," Caleb answered. The room tensed, every man waiting for the first shot. But Caleb didn't draw. Instead, he turned to Alara. "You walk beside me. Not behind." Her eyes met his, trembling. Nobody had ever spoken to her like that. They made it 3 steps before Seth barked, "You ain't taking what's mine." The sheriff burst through the doors, gun drawn, siding with Seth. "Cowboy, you're crossing a line that'll bury you." Caleb didn't flinch. "Bury me, then. But I won't watch a girl live as chains." Act 4, The Gunfight. The sun sank low, casting blood-red light across Hollow Creek. Word spread like wildfire, a showdown was coming. One cowboy against Seth Harlow and his men. Alara stood in the shadows, clutching a scrap of cloth Caleb had given her. "For hope," he'd said. The street was empty except for Caleb and Seth, guns heavy at their hips. Seth smirked. "Last chance, cowboy. Leave the girl, ride on, and maybe I'll let you live." Caleb's voice was steady, low, but it cut through the silence like steel. "A man who chains a girl ain't no man. And I don't let wolves roam free." The bell tower struck. The gunfire echoed. 2 shots. 1 scream. 1 body hit the dirt. When the dust cleared, Caleb still stood, smoke curling from his revolver. Seth lay face down, his empire crumbling. Act 5, The Aftermath. The town stared in shock. The sheriff dropped his badge in the dirt, his cowardice laid bare. The men who had called Alara property now turned away, ashamed. Caleb walked back to her, holstered his gun, and knelt. "You're free." Her hands shook as the shackles clattered to the ground. Freedom didn't feel real. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Why would you risk your life, for me?" Caleb's voice cracked, filled with a weight of memory. "Because once, someone saved me when the world said I wasn't worth saving. And because no soul should ever live in chains." She wept, but her tears weren't just of pain. They were of release, of a spirit finally unbroken. Act 6, The Legacy. Elara didn't leave Hollow Creek. She stayed, not as property, but as a voice. She opened a small schoolhouse where no child would grow up believing they were less than human. Caleb rode on, a shadow against the horizon. He never asked for thanks, never sought glory. But stories spread, about the cowboy who stood against chains, who drew a line with his life and said, "Not while I'm breathing." And in every town where whispers of his name traveled, people found courage they didn't know they had. Act 7, The Return of Shadows. The sun dipped behind the desert hills, painting Hollow Creek in blood-red hues. Elara had begun to carve a new life, teaching children beneath the oak tree, her voice a steady reminder that hope could grow even in broken soil. Yet shadows crept closer. Seth Harlow's 3 brothers, Jarrett, Malcolm, and Reed, men who carried cruelty in their bones, had arrived for vengeance. The townsfolk hid in silence as the brothers demanded Elara's return. Their threats cracked across the streets like whips, "Give us the girl, or this town burns." Fear spread, until boots struck the dirt with calm defiance. Caleb Ward had returned, his silhouette cutting through the dusk, revolver low on his hip. "If it's blood you're after," he said, eyes steady, "take mine first. But you'll never touch her. Not now. Not ever." Act 8, The Storm in the Street. The street became a stage, torches flickering in the hands of the brothers' hired men. The town whispered from shuttered windows, hearts pounding. Caleb stood alone, yet his presence filled the air with something unbreakable. Jarrett Harlow sneered. "1 man against 3. You'll die where you stand." Caleb's voice cut back like steel. "Maybe. But I'll die standing for what's right. And that's more than any of you can claim." Elara stepped onto the porch, trembling but unbowed. Her voice rang out, "I will not kneel again. I am not your property. I am free." The courage in her tone cracked through the silence, and for the first time, the people of Hollow Creek stirred. The blacksmith clenched his hammer, the baker held a shovel, mothers clutched their children and whispered, "Stand with her." The brothers laughed at the sight of townsfolk peeking out, but laughter can be brittle when truth cuts deep. Act 9, Fire and Bullets. Night fell hard. A shot fired, chaos erupted. The Harlow brothers drew fast, their men spraying bullets into the street. Caleb moved like the desert wind, his revolver barking fire. He dropped Reed in the first breath, the youngest brother falling with shock on his face. Elara pulled children to safety while townsfolk, emboldened by Caleb's defiance, fought back. The blacksmith swung his hammer into a hired gun, the innkeeper smashed a chair into another. The battle for Hollow Creek had begun. Malcolm charged Caleb, blade in hand, but Caleb twisted, disarmed him, and the knife fell into the dirt. Their fight raged hand to hand until Caleb's gun cracked once more, Malcolm collapsed, his cruelty silenced. Only Jarrett remained, his fury burning hotter than the torches around them. Act 10, The Last Brother. Jarrett dragged Elara into the street, pistol pressed to her head, shouting to the crowd. "She was ours. She'll always be ours. You can kill me, but her blood will prove she was never free." The crowd froze. Caleb lowered his weapon, eyes burning with rage and sorrow. His voice was low, steady. "You're wrong. Her freedom isn't yours to take, it's hers to live." Elara, trembling, met Caleb's eyes. For the first time, she felt the strength within herself, the strength he had believed in all along. With sudden courage, she stomped Jarrett's boot, twisted from his grip, and shoved herself free. In that breath of defiance, Caleb fired. Jarrett fell backward into the dirt, his pistol clattering from his hand. Silence swallowed the street. The brothers were no more. Act 11, The New Dawn. Hollow Creek stood still, the smoke of battle drifting like ghosts. Then, slowly, one by one, townsfolk stepped into the street. They no longer looked at Alara with pity or shame. They looked at her with respect, with recognition. She had been a prisoner, then a symbol, and now, in her defiance, a leader. Caleb holstered his weapon, weary but unbroken. He walked to her, voice rough. "You did that. Not me. You claimed your freedom." Tears traced her dust-streaked face as she whispered, "You gave me the courage to believe I could." Caleb shook his head. "Courage was always yours. All I did was remind you." Act 12, Legacy in the Dust. Weeks passed, and Hollow Creek changed. No longer did cruelty sit at its heart. Alara's schoolhouse grew, children filling its benches, their voices bright with hope. The town found strength in unity, no longer ruled by fear but by the shared promise of dignity. Caleb stayed for a time, helping rebuild, his presence a quiet comfort. Yet legends are restless, he could not remain forever. One morning, before dawn, he saddled his horse. Alara stood at the gate, eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. "Will I see you again?" she asked. Caleb smiled faintly beneath his hat. "Legends don't stay, Alara. They ride on. But remember this, no soul belongs in chains. Not while we're breathing." With that, he turned his horse toward the horizon, his figure swallowed by the rising sun. Alara watched him vanish, but she no longer felt small or bound. She carried his words, his defiance, his belief, and she carried her own strength. Hollow Creek would remember the cowboy who stood against shadows, but more than that, they would remember the girl who refused to kneel. And so the legend lived on, not just of Caleb Ward, but of every soul who stood for freedom when the world tried to chain them. No soul is property. Not while we're breathing. We learn from this story that no soul is property, no voice is worthless, and no chain is unbreakable. True courage is standing when the world kneels, and true strength is breathing freedom into those who've forgotten how. Not while we're breathing. Please subscribe my channel for more videos.